38 past the hour. We're following breaking news. You can see it right there on your screen. The Dow Jones down about 620 points at this hour now. President Trump has announced that he is going to be imposing a 25% tariff on all imported vehicles and foreign-made auto parts, expected to go into effect next week. Also, almost half of the cars sold in the U.S. and 60% of the auto parts are imported. According to Goldman Sachs, the estimated tariffs could add about $5,000 to $15,000 on the cost of foreign-made cars, and it could add $3,000 to $8,000 to cars made in the U.S. Joining me now is Washington Post opinion columnist Catherine Rampell. She is the new co-host of the evening edition of MSNBC's The Weekend. Catherine, it's great seeing you. Thank you. So Dow at 620, down 620. It's a relatively unusual number to be going at. It's been a roller coaster on Wall Street, but mostly down. Why?
Yeah, mostly a downward heading roller coaster. In fact,
what do you think is prompting this days?
We got a whole bunch of ugly economic data today, and this is an ugly response from the markets because of that. So a few different things. We got actual inflation data, actual consumer spending data. The consumer spending data were very weak. It looks like we may be on track to have the worst quarter in real consumer spending, after you adjust for price changes, since early COVID. The inflation numbers themselves, a little bit worse than where we want them to be. Then separately, there was this report from the University of Michigan on consumer sentiment. So these are not actual hard data.
These are how people feel.
How people feel, exactly. It's sort of a softer metric of things. But that was also no bueno, I guess I would say, on a number of fronts. And it had all of the hallmarks of concerns about stagflation, which is the worst possible economic set of circumstances we could get. Stagflation basically means that the economy is deteriorating as prices are going up. And so you saw that in the data because 2/3 of consumers said that they thought unemployment was going to get worse in the coming year. That's the highest share since 2009 during the middle of the financial crisis. Yep. You also saw long-term inflation expectations. So that's, if you ask people how much do you think prices are going to go up, that was at its highest level in like 3 decades. So the numbers were quite bad. And the reason why markets would be freaking out in response to all of this is because it puts the Federal Reserve in a really tight spot. The measures that the Fed would take to deal with higher prices are the opposite of the measures that the Fed would take to deal with a deteriorating labor market or slower growth. So there's this question of, can the Fed continue to cut rates? They've been on pause for a little while. Will they ultimately have to raise rates if inflation gets out of control again? That's not good for stock markets. That's not good for households. That's not good for businesses.
Catherine, so if, and on the sentiment side of the questions, people fear or have concerns about what the economy could look like going back to 2009, that was when we were losing 750,000 jobs a month in this country. What do you think people are, in other words, when you're comparing and contrasting to something that was so massive, like 750,000 jobs a month being lost, why do you think that is?
So I'm not saying that we are actually going to return
to
the dark days of the financial crisis. There is certainly concern. I think that relates to a few different factors. One, as you mentioned before, tariffs. The tariffs have created, at the very least, a lot of uncertainty in this economy, but at worst, potentially much higher prices. You mentioned car tariffs. So if auto tariffs are imposed, that's going to raise prices for consumers by thousands of dollars on both domestically made cars as well as foreign cars. Even domestic cars use a lot of foreign-made parts, or the parts cross borders, at least between Canada and Mexico. The other tariffs are going to raise their prices, too, whether we're talking about potentially things like groceries or, appliances that they buy. There was an article the other day about maybe we're going to have a toilet paper shortage again because we get I know, the last thing we need.
There wasn't even a shortage last time, and there was a shortage.
Right. Because paper that would be coming over from Canada will will receive higher tariffs. So some of it's about tariffs. Some of it's about just sort of like the erratic treatment and behavior of this president, whether we're talking about mass layoffs that were not particularly well considered from Trump towards his government, DOGE, towards his civil servants. That will have effects not only for the civil servants themselves, but for the services that they are involved in, Social Security, food stamps, all sorts of healthcare related issues. That's going to have effects for the typical American. And there are knock-on effects for local economies where those workers are being laid off, the businesses that they patronize, the local coffee shop, et cetera. Those may have some knock-on effects as well.
Why is it you think that when the first Trump administration got rid of NAFTA and then actually, negotiated USMCA with Mexico and Canada, it was the deal made by President Trump's first administration, and now there are tariffs over which essentially destroy USMCA with Canada and Mexico?
I wish I could tell you.
I mean, is there...
I think the problem
What's the logic?
There isn't logic, as far as I can tell. We don't know what Trump's objectives are. They change from day to day. From
American-made cars, American-made parts, American-made washers.
Maybe, except that he is also tariffing the inputs to all of those things, right? So cars, washing machines, dishwashers use a lot of steel. Right. We are also tariffing
aluminum for cars.
Yes, depending on the model.
Right.
For the typical car, the highest share of that car by weight is steel. More than half of the weight of a car is steel. So if you make steel more expensive, that's not going to be good for U.S. automakers. So he's tariffing the inputs as well as the finished products. He's tariffing the stuff that goes into the cars and the cars themselves. All of that is going to be passed along, at least in part, down the food chain to consumers. So it's unlikely, in my view, to have much of a manufacturing renaissance effect that he promises, but will cause a lot of damage to the process.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking that, there's been so much positive communication between specifically the Trump administration of 2025 and Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico. There has not been that same level of communication with the Canadian authorities, even though today the president of the United States had that call that both sides are saying was very positive. But I'm just wondering, how do you deal with a business partner that has, quote, good communication with you, like they've had with Claudia Sheinbaum and previously with Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and yet there doesn't seem to be any movement on the United States side to bring those tariffs down when fentanyl has been going down, when the number at the border is pretty much down to zero right now. So there is actual movement from the Mexican side, and yet to no avail for the Americans?
I think this is, again, the issue. Trump does not actually know what he wants.
Where are the metrics?
Right. Is it about fentanyl? Is it about immigration? Is it about, no, they don't care about those things. They just want to raise tariff revenue.
Right, because fentanyl has been down to almost,
and was not really a problem ever with the Canadian government. Right? So it all felt a little bit like a fig leaf, like a pretext for just throwing around these tariffs because it made Trump feel tough. I don't know. He loves tariffs. He can't really decide why he loves them. And again, some of these objectives, if they are real, are contradictory. If you're trying to raise revenue from tariffs, then that suggests you don't care about using them as a threat to get down fentanyl, for example.
And if so, I'm just wondering, give me the metrics, right? This is what I require. Okay. Metrics are there or they're not.
Right.
Catherine, it's great to talk to you in
Likewise.
person. It's great to see you. Thanks.
Big developments today in what is shaping up to be one of the most consequential legal battles of the second Trump administration. This morning, two law firms, Jenner & Block and WilmerHale, sued the Trump administration, two separate lawsuits to block executive orders that stripped their attorneys of security clearances and prevented them from representing government clients. In one of its motions, attorneys for Jenner and Block write, quote, "The order threatens not only Jenner, but also its clients and the legal system itself. Our Constitution, top to bottom, forbids attempts by the government to punish citizens and lawyers based on the clients they represent, the positions they advocate, the opinions they voice, and the people with whom they associate." One of Jenner and Block's biggest sins in the eyes of Donald Trump, employing our colleague, Andrew Weissman, who worked on the Mueller investigation both before and after working at Jenner and Block. The firm, Wilmer Hale, also suing to stop an executive order signed by Trump on Thursday. It counted among its employees Robert Mueller himself. Both Mueller and Andrew Weissman left their respective firms 4 years ago. In total, 4 executive orders targeting 4 different law firms have now resulted in 3 lawsuits. One firm, Paul Weiss, struck a deal with the Trump administration. In the midst of all the lawsuits and legal battles playing out in the courts involving Team Trump, and there are many, it may be hard to understand just why this all matters. As Jenner and Block notes in its lawsuit, it has done work for clients suing the Biden administration, just as it now is representing clients suing the Trump administration. Wilmer Hale represented Elon Musk's Twitter when it tried to block a subpoena from special counsel Jack Smith. What the Trump administration has found issue with are these firms employing their critics and their opponents having access to good legal counsel. Wilmer Hale, for instance, currently represents a group of inspectors general fired by Donald Trump. It has also represented the DNC and the 2024 Harris campaign. Jenner and Block represents groups suing to stop cuts to cancer research at the NIH. Elon Musk giving the whole game away when, in a response to a win in court for Jenner's clients against the Trump administration, he tweeted, "Which law firms are pushing these anti-democratic cases to impede the will of the people?" And that is where we start today with New York Times Justice Department reporter Glenn Thrush and MSNBC Justice and Legal Affairs analyst, former senior advisor to AG Garland, Anthony Coley. Glenn, explain to me what is happening with these suits.
Well, what's going on in general is the Trump administration is attempting to intimidate big law in this country, which is predominantly dominated by former Democratic officials, both with the Garland regime and prior regimes. But Trump understands in sort of an X-ray vision kind of way the economic bottom line that supports these institutions. These are important and far-reaching orders insofar as they are able to, or they're an attempt to sort of take out this bastion of democratic and liberal power. These institutions not only sort of represent commercial interests, wide-ranging commercial interests across the country, but as you said, they represent a lot of individuals who have equities in fighting Trump. And in general, this is part of a much broader campaign. You're seeing it on the press side when you start excluding the Associated Press from the pool, when, as Trump has done over the years, filed baseless lawsuits against media organizations, against a pollster in Iowa. What he is attempting to do in a very clever, calculated, and completely across-the-board way is to bring the walls in on institutions that have traditionally opposed him, not only to sort of create, in a pragmatic sense, a weakening of his opposition, but to scare people, to intimidate people. That's why those 2 lawsuits today were so significant, because they did represent a bit of a counterattack.
And to test the legal system itself.
Right. And so I agree with everything Glenn just said. I think there's also something else going on here. Right. He has said, he has promised that he is going to enact revenge against his political opponents, right? I think there are 3, we're at step 3 of what this looks like. The first step, Alicia, is you get rid of all of the career lawyers at the Justice Department, people who have more fidelity to the rule of law than to you, right? Second thing that he did, you want to get rid of the referees, the inspectors generals across the board, right? He's going to put his own people in place, see no evil, hear no evil. And now we're at this third step, where he really is just so intent on making sure that the people that he's about to go after don't have access to the best legal counsel in the world. And of course, underpinning everything, Alicia, that I just said is having an attorney general in place who is absolutely loyal to him. And I'm not talking about loyalty in the traditional sense of the word, like loyalty a husband has for a wife. I'm talking about blind obedience. And that's what he has in this attorney general, Ted Bundy.
I would open the aperture on what Anthony has said to say that, yes, it is about having a chilling effect on the firms that they're going after, but it is about having a chilling effect on the entire legal profession. There's a lawsuit that's filed by another law firm targeted by the Trump administration, Perkins Coie, that is in the hands of federal judge Beryl Howell. And in that case, she said, I am sure that many in the legal profession are watching in horror in what Perkins Coie is going through here. The order casts a chilling harm of blizzard proportions across the legal profession. She blocked Trump's order there. Do you think that is the direction these other suits are going in?
It seems to be, there seems to be significant constitutional questions about their capacity to do this. But in the interim, there could be a lot of damage done. Now, some of these settlements, the two settlements that were reached by the law firms with the White House, they really have... For those of us who've studied military history, that seems to be the predicate. This is less about legal history than military history. It reminds me of Attila the Hun. He would go from sort of city to city, come outside the city walls and say, if you don't agree with me and open up the city walls, I'm going to destroy you. If you do agree to bow down before me, I will let you pass. The question is, are these guys kind of playing for time, the ones that are making the settlements? They make these settlements. Is there a potential that this moves up the appellate chain, that appellate courts are going to rule that these executive orders are unconstitutional, or perhaps even the Supreme Court weighing in?
I want to stay with the Attila the Hun metaphor, because there's another law firm, Skadden Arps, struck a deal with the Trump administration to avoid an executive order like these other firms are facing. Just take a listen.
Skadden Arps, Slate, Meagher, and Flom announced the following agreement regarding a series of actions that were taken by Skadden. And it reads, number one, Skadden will provide a total of at least $100 million in pro bono legal services during the Trump administration and beyond to cause that the president and Skadden both support. This is something we both support in relation to the following areas: assisting veterans and other public servants, including members of the military, law enforcement, and on and on. Number two, Skadden will commit to the mission of providing pro bono legal services to a wide variety of deserving organizations and individuals. Skadden is committed to funding no fewer than 5 Skadden Fellows. This was essentially a settlement, and you'll be able to read that in great detail. We appreciate Skadden's coming to the table.
Anthony, is that a settlement or is that a shakedown?
It's a shakedown is what it is. And I mean, at the end of the day, what you want are law firms, just like they said that they would do, right? These are people who they take an unbiased look at the facts before them. These are folks in the prior administration, like they took on clients that sued the Biden administration, right? What we have here is a straight shakedown. And you would hope that these big law firms, these partners at some point would say, you know what, I'm mindful of how history is going to look at me and what we do in this moment. And right now, history is not going to look favorably at what they're doing and how they are bending the knee to Donald Trump.
Brazen new power grab by Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Today, Trump moved to formally abolish the USA Agency for International Development, known as USAID. Trump notified the agency's workers that they will either be fired or they'll be transferred to the State Department. It's an escalation of Trump's attack on the decades-old agency that administers foreign aid. This will certainly spark a major legal clash because, by law, Trump cannot single-handedly dissolve an agency that was established by Congress. Earlier this month, a federal judge ruled that Elon Musk's initial attempt to hobble the agency was unconstitutional. Now, Musk has admitted that he made some mistakes in his efforts to dismantle USAID.
We will make mistakes. We won't be perfect. But when we make a mistake, we'll fix it very quickly. So, for example, with USAID, one of the things we accidentally canceled very briefly was Ebola, Ebola prevention. I think we all want Ebola prevention.
Mistakes were made. This intensifying fight over USAID is just the tip of the iceberg. The administration issued a new executive order directing Vice President J.D. Vance to root out anti-American and divisive content at the Smithsonian. And that's not all. The Washington Post just obtained leaked internal White House documents detailing proposals for cuts across 22 government agencies. If enacted, the cuts would slash half the staff from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The Interior Department could lose a fourth of their workers, and the IRS could cut nearly 1 in 3 of its employees. Amidst all of this, Elon Musk sat down for a friendly Fox interview where he pushed talking points that, unfortunately, are at odds with the facts.
Basically, almost no one's gotten fired. That's what we're saying.
In the process, just for us to be locked out, kicked out, and then cast out.
Legitimate recipients of Social Security will receive more money, not less money.
Those protesting tell us they are against the Trump administration's moves to close dozens of SSA field offices across the country, along with eliminating over-the-phone ID verifications.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. They're trying to make it so difficult for people to get their own money back.
What's the most astonishing thing you've found out in this process?
The sheer amount of waste and fraud in the government. It is astonishing. It's mind-blowing.
So far, there appears to be no evidence of fraud, despite Elon Musk's claims of it.
Joining me now to break all of this down is Michelle Norris, senior contributing editor for MSNBC. Michelle, help me understand this. USAID was established in 1961 under the auspices of the Kennedy administration, and it was intended to streamline and coordinate the distribution of foreign aid and counteract the spread of communism in the developing world. Why has this particular agency become targeted by the Trump administration? What's going on here?
Melissa, I wish first of all, I'm thrilled to be with you. Thank you for having me tonight. I wish I could help you understand it, but a lot of people here in Washington, D.C. are scratching their head. This was an agency that has not always been popular with Republicans because of some of the places where they have decided to do their work. But I think it's fair to say that many people did not expect it to be gutted in quite this way. Mm-hmm. And Marco Rubio, he understands. He was a member of the Senate for quite a long time. He understands that the executive branch does not have the unilateral power to dismantle this organization. But there's a pattern that you see in almost everything that you ticked through in the introduction, which is just ignoring protocol, ignoring the Constitution, ignoring legal precedent, and just going in and going inside these agencies with the equivalent of a bunker bomb and just blowing them up from within.
You are right. USAID has often been on the receiving end of some Republican ire. But you know who else does not like USAID? Authoritarian government. So are we on the losing end of this? Have we lost the thread a little bit when we're dismantling an agency that has really been effective in helping to advance democracy and dampening down on authoritarianism across the world?
Well, let's just also remind our viewers that this is happening on a day where there is a massive 7, earthquake of a magnitude of, above 7 in Myanmar. And there have been at least 150 people killed, and they expect that number to go quite high, to be higher than that. There are also people within the government who are also worried about this because there's a little bit of work that's done within USAID. There's intelligence gathering that's done. It is a goodwill organization. There's a lot of foreign aid that is distributed. So we fight hungry bellies, but we also fight for hearts and minds. And when we do this kind of work, if you talk to people who are working in the agencies that don't talk much about the work they do, like the CIA or the National Security Administration, they will note that they're able to actually use a program like this to do a little bit of diplomacy, quiet diplomacy as well. So there's a lot of head scratching in Washington. Now, Marco Rubio spokespeople have said that some of this work will actually come under the tent of the State Department. Right. So who knows how much of it will actually continue. But with many of these agencies that have been placed, I was going to say under the microscope, but really it's under the bludgeon. The question is, why not examine what's wrong and then fix what's wrong? as opposed to going in and moving so quickly to dismantle these agencies, especially since in so many cases, as you saw in the intro, that they have to track back and actually hire people back, or they have to deal with the courts. There's a way to do this which would be much more efficient and much more humane.
Can we pivot to something a little closer to home, certainly closer than Myanmar? There is a new Trump executive order that charges the Vice President J.D. Vance with eliminating, quote, anti-American ideology and anything that he finds to be, quote, improper from the Smithsonian. And of particular note here, the executive order names the Smithsonian Museum of African American History as well as the Planned Museum of Women's History. What's going on here?
Well, with the stroke of a pen, they are deciding what is deemed to be fully American and what is deemed to be anti-American. And they're going to have a fight here. You know, there are a number of people who are very proud of the Smithsonian, very proud of the way the Smithsonian has widened its aperture to tell a fuller story of America. Because the story that we tell ourselves as Americans is important. And it's important that it is a full and complete story and reflects the histories, even the difficult moments in history, but reflects the histories of as many people as possible. Now, the Smithsonian gets about 62%, specifically the National Museum of African American History and Culture gets about 62% of its money from the federal government. The museums are, you know, when he targets the National Museum of African American History and Culture, that is a very successful museum. You know, it opened just a few years ago. More than 197 donors raised $297 million to make sure that they were able to open the doors, and a much, larger number of smaller donors. So when they start to narrow the story that is told, it's bad for America in terms of the history that we tell ourselves. It's bad for the Smithsonian also in terms of the way it opens its doors.
We will face tariffs with retaliatory trade actions of our own that will have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impacts here in Canada. The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation, is over. What exactly the United States does next is unclear. But what is clear is that we, as Canadians, have agency. We can give ourselves much more than any foreign government, including the United States, can ever take away.
Says it's over. I feel like yelling, Shane, come back. Shane. We like the Canadians. Everybody who doesn't like Canadians, for God's sake?
People, it's, yeah.
We literally had comics in the 80s and 90s because it was so preposterous talking about a war with Canada. What's that about, Mayor? What is that about?
I don't know. I don't understand. That's why I'm here to learn.
Okay. Well, that was new Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney responding to President Trump's latest tariff announcement in which he plans to impose a 25% levy on cars and auto parts that are made outside the United States. This comes as Toronto's mayor is also looking to retaliate by restricting U.S. companies from bidding on the city's contracts. And we have the mayor of Toronto, Olivia Chow, is joining us now. She's going to explain all of this to us. She's in Washington today to attend a trilateral trade summit hosted by the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which will also include mayors from Canada and Mexico. And first of all, I mean, all kidding aside, I'm sure you understand, and the Canadian people understand how much Americans love Canadians. I mean, there's a little skirmishing right now. Obviously, the government but just the relations between our countries have been so positive for so long.
Americans and Canadians continue to love each other. My brother lives in Seattle, is an American. It's been American since the 70s. So we have a lot of families, American Canadians. We do a huge amount of trade in Toronto to U.S. We buy a lot of American goods. Actually, we buy more goods than China, Japan, France combined. It's like
Canada
500.
does.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, because you're so close to us.
Yeah.
We buy all sorts of things. And this tariff business, totally senseless, I don't like, hurtful, have just stopped everybody in its track.
Yeah.
And it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt the cost of living of Americans because it means the gasoline price is going to go up, grocery price is going to go up, housing price is going to go up, everything is going to go up. Like, why?
On both sides. And hey, Jim, as far as Explainer goes, just for viewers, it's really come more into focus over the past week or so for me as I'm trying to sort through what in the world's going on here. When you and I were first bumping into each other on the Hill back in the mid-1990s, NAFTA was a huge thing.
Right.
And that really was a dividing line, NAFTA, which was hailed by Bill Clinton, Newt Gingrich, leaders on both sides, but populists, and they'll say, such as myself, were very concerned about jobs that could leave America. And I think we're seeing 30 years later the impact of that. There are so many bonuses, but why would any politician be doing this? Because that lingering resentment that remains with a lot of working Americans, right?
Yeah, but I've never heard too many Americans who have a lot of resent towards the Canadians.
No, not
right?
toward the Canadians.
Good to know.
But it is about the populist movement, the trade. And I think this is a little less about populism, and it's a commingling of two things that are on Trump's mind a lot these days. One is he does see all of these tariffs and tariff threats as bargaining chips, right? So he, like, some of it's real, some of it's not, some of it's on, some of it's off. That is being commingled, I think, in his mind with this idea that in the future, the war, America's greatness is going to be defined by artificial intelligence, which is going to require a lot of chips, a lot of data, a lot of compute. That's going to require a lot of minerals, a lot of energy. So he feels like we're going to need a lot of leverage with Canada on different parts of that. Does he really think that Canada should become the 51st state? I think it started as a joke, but I think it now is something that is really top of mind. I don't think he's joking at all about Greenland.
No, he's not.
I think they want the minerals that sit under your land, that sit under Greenland's land. So there is like an overall theory that's driving it. And in the U.S., I think we're all pretty baffled. Like, you can understand getting angry with some of our European partners about, are you funding NATO or not? But looking at Canada and saying, like, that's a threat, and yet, yes, like, our problems are the result of Canadian behavior, I think is baffling.
I think it is tiered. I think it is, first of all, China. I think most Americans would welcome a trade war with China. Europe, I've heard Americans, Barney Frank and I went on the floor, and actually one thing we agreed on was Europeans, this was back in the 90s, needed to pull their weight when it came to the military. The war was 40 years back. But you are right. It is surprising to Americans that Canada has gotten the political target of this administration.
And I don't think Americans want to take over Canada. I don't think Americans want us to be the 51st state. Certainly, Canadians have no interest on it. It is just, it has ignited huge amount of uncertainty, nationalistic pride. We are strong Canadians. We're going to fight back. We're going to defend ourselves. Are you kidding me? Don't you dare do that to us. And so first it was surprised. Now the angry face is coming in, and we're saying that we're not going to buy any Americans' good anymore. So there's all these buy Canadian apps that are happening across our nation. As the City of Toronto, we have put up Love Local sign. We've mounted a Buy Canadian campaign. And, well, fine, if you don't want our goods, we will also not buy your goods. It's going to hurt both sides, but we have to defend ourselves.
Canadians are not coming to the U.S. to travel either, by the way. I mean, that's almost ended. They're just, the numbers have gone down from, like, from 1 million something to, like, tens of thousands or so. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's taken me a long time to realize, and I'm sure it's taken Canadians months too, to see that what initially seemed like it was about bargaining and extorting concessions reflects something deeper. I mean, Donald Trump really does want to be this 19th century president. He wants to make America great again, but he also wants to make America bigger. He has this idea of extending boundaries. There is a manifest destiny quality, and Canada's in the way. And so, I'm pleased to see Carney explicitly and forthrightly say, no, we will resist this.
That's right.
The relationship we had is over, implicitly meaning as long as you talk this way. I'm curious how you think Canada's going to come back from where it is now. I mean, Donald Trump won't be president forever. Is this story going to revert to the U.S.-Canada relations that we know, or are we really in a different era now forever?
I can't really tell. That's what's a bit scary about it. Toronto is the 4th largest city in North America. We have a budget that's $79 billion. The tone, the feeling that I'm getting from Torontonians is that we're hurt. We're going to fight back. We're going to really be more resilient. We are always resilient and strong. We are feeling very united right now, and we're going to rely on ourselves. We're going to make our own things, buy our own goods. And once you have established that, you feel, well, we don't need to depend on American anymore in many areas. I think the mutual feelings of Americans and Canadians when they like each other, that will continue. But in terms of government to government, is there going to be that trust anymore? I'm not sure. It depends on what happens in these 4 years.
I think the term astonishing has been devalued. But just think about what we just talked about here. It is astonishing that you have the leader of Canada saying that the relationship with America is over, that you have a mayor of one of the biggest cities in North America saying that it might not recover from being over. No one thought that was coming in November.
Julia, I just have to ask you, we weren't going to talk about this. I saw an extraordinarily disturbing image of Kristi Noem standing in front of prisoners in cages, standing there straight, shaved heads, no shirts, stacked high, obviously posing for Kristi Noem at, we are sure, the guards' orders. Can you give me some background on that? Because that was such a jarring, disturbing image, and something that I don't think I've ever seen in American government.
Yeah, I think that deserved more attention this week. I'm glad you brought that up. That's when, just this week, actually just 2 days ago, Kristi Noem, Secretary of Homeland Security, went to El Salvador's CICOT prison, where they just sent over 200 people that the administration says is tied to the gang Tren de Aragua. Right. Although, as we've heard in circuit court, it was very hard for them to prove those connections, but they used the Alien Enemies Act to do it anyway. I think what you saw there, though, really gets us outside of this back and forth about what's going on with Trump in the courts, and it shows the reality of that prison and people who were sent there without due process in our country. She's standing in front of these men, as you see there, many of them shirtless. They put 80 men in those cells for 23 and a half hours a day. They sleep like that. There's no individual beds. They're not allowed to talk. There are no mattresses, sheets. We've heard about some pretty disturbing, it's notorious for human rights abuses. I won't get into all of those details. She's seen there to show how tough she is on this. And of course, it's one of the reasons why Trump picked her. Many people thought it would be Chad Wolf. He picked her mainly for the reason that she wrote in her memoir that she shot her dog, who was untrainable. Trump likes her toughness, and she wants to put that toughness on display. And she said in that video that this should serve as a warning to anyone who comes to the United States illegally. Now, to cross the border illegally is a misdemeanor, something that's not usually even prosecuted in federal court, something that really doesn't even keep you from getting asylum. There are plenty of people who historically have claimed asylum by crossing the border illegally. Now, under this administration, you could end up in those situations. The other thing we should be asking is, how do we know that everyone there was even illegally in the United States without due process? You could potentially have American citizens. A judge even asked the Justice Department, could you put me on one of those planes and send me there? So there are a lot of questions behind that. They want to use this as a deterrence measure, but one of the things we're trying to get to the bottom of is, how long are those people going to be there? Because when she was asked that, she could not answer that question.
All right, NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, thank you so much. And coming up, Canada's Prime Minister is vowing to fight back against President Trump's tariffs, saying Canada's economic relationship with the U.S. is over. That's a little early for that, I think. We're going to play those comments for you. What's that about? Plus, the mayor of Toronto is going to join the conversation with a look at how her city's planning to retaliate. I blame Canada. This is seriously, it's a South Park movie, except it's real. It's stunning. A beautiful, beautiful shot of New York City. What's the song, TJ? Is this Rush? Okay, yeah. Not a Rush guy. The debate, let the debate begin. We'll be right back.